So the first question is, in chapter 6 of Alexander, discuss the Jena 6 and discuss your reaction to this Jena 6 situation.
For the question 1, Alexander describes a sense of excitement about the possibility of a new movement launched by the case of the Jena 6. However, she also suggests that racial justice advocates are still stuck in old models of organizing versus to previous systems of racial social control. And so this is deeply problematic, as one of the main points of the book is that if we respect the new Jim Crow to resemble the old one too closely, so we will miss the racist forces that are unique to the current era.
Yeah, I agree, because it was talking about how it was kind of too closely following, like you said, like it was too closely following what the last movement did, where it was going after like blatantly racist actions and not necessarily anything institutional. I mean, the whole fact that it took I guess there were some black students that beat up some white students over the incident of people hanging nooses from trees, and they were trying to charge them as adults. And like the irony was that that happens all the time to people who are involved in like, drug charge, like non-violent, drug charges or other charges that shouldn't be as severe. But what it took for the whole nation and for everybody to come together was imagery associating it with Jim Crow. Like all those other situations where people have been arrested for non-violent things and been tried as an adult and been sent to an adult prison, like nobody said anything, nobody made a big deal out of it, and it still happens.
I agree, and to me, the big thing that I got from the whole chapter was that, or at least from the Jena 6 part, was that it takes extremes before we as a society recognize things as a problem. And I think in this day and age, this happens a lot. It happens a lot with like the environment, I feel like, with the wildfires in Australia and stuff. No one really cares about like the environment in all the other small ways, but when there's a huge wildfire, all of a sudden we can all band together and say that it's something that we need to do better about. But yeah, they don't really care about all these other small institutional things that would be a lot harder to recognize, but are problems. But once it's associated with nooses and it's right in front of their face, it's when we finally start to care as a society. And I think that's a problem.
Yeah, obviously agree with everything you guys say. I guess the biggest thing is it just sucks that it has to be like national news for that to become like a prominent thing.
At the end of chapter 6, discuss a letter James Baldwin wrote his nephew in 1962. And do you guys agree with the letter? And does it still apply to the United States today?
I think it very much still applies today. How we as a society just kind of allow people's lives to be destroyed over little insignificant, crimes that shouldn't come with these mandatory, life destroying sentences. And that the more that we try to kind of remain ignorant of this, like the deeper these problems go. I'm trying to read it now. Um, if somebody else has something to add.
When it talks about how they uh, have us in a ghetto and we're not supposed to succeed, I think a lot of places in our country uh, obviously don't give the best like you aren't supposed to succeed in those places. So I do think that, or a lot of people don't succeed, I guess. So I do think it's very prevalent.
Yeah, I agree. That's the part that I thought was still really true today. It says the limits of your ambition were thus expected to be set forever. You were born into a society which spelled out with brutal clarity in as many ways as possible that you were a worthless human being and you were not expected to aspire to excellence and you were expected to make peace with mediocrity. And I think that's something that you definitely still see these days where we set them up for failure in a lot of ways, especially something that's a lot of these documentaries have been referring to, which is just setting them up for failure in regards to education, which is definitely a problem.
The part that I was trying to find was where it says that we cannot be free until they are free, which I interpret that as meaning like we ourselves, our society is not free of this guilt until we can rectify this injustice that is still happening. And we still have a lot of work to do on that because obviously there's still a lot of over incarceration of people of color, and most of it for really stupid reasons.
Right. And for me, the ending part meant that like their fate is kind of tied, their fate as minorities is tied to our fate, to the fate of the majorities, their freedom at least, since they are determining all the rules and like they're the ones that are putting them down so hard institutionally. So that's what I took it to mean when it said we cannot be free until they are free. That it's not entirely in their control on their own. It's something that we would all have to do. Question 3 is your reaction to the documentary Teach Us All.
Well, when I watched it, I thought that it did a really good job of visually showing, how segregated our society still is. Uh, just the fact that, and I know we've read about this previously in the class, but like just showing like on maps the fact that like white families after integration moved just so that they wouldn't have to send their kids to school with people of other races, and that there's schools out there with 95% of a certain race, and they never really have that experience of dealing with people of other races and cultures. And the fact that we're now technically we're not segregated by race, but we are segregated by class, and that's the new version of segregation.
Right. And the two become so heavily conflated. And that's what like the documentary shows a lot. That, yeah, sure, we aren't technically doing it on color, or at least we tell ourselves that. But with the way that things are happening through like gentrification and through designated areas for slums, we build up this institution that makes it really hard to give people the same stuff. So we basically become segregated. Really early on, it basically describes something we talked about a little bit earlier, that which was like, yeah, most minorities won't face like the really extremes. They won't get beaten up by a cop. They won't go to prison, but they are going to all go through the education system because it's so fundamental. And with that being so unfair, like, how can we expect anything to go right when the most basic thing is already so messed up for them?
I think that the documentary actually tied in really well to what we were saying about the last question, that guy's letter to his nephew, where it's saying that your ambitions were expected to be set forever. You're set down in a ghetto where it is intended that you will perish. And that's exactly what's happening to these kids. I mean, they're born into these neighborhoods where the schools are so underfunded and basically aren't giving them any of the skills that they need to ever escape that.
Definitely. And I think the fact that it was written so long ago, but still is able to hold such relevance in its wording, I think just shows that it's not like some new problem. It's just this fundamental issue. So for question 4, we each discuss how the course has enhanced your cultural diversity in education in terms of race, gender, and social class. For me, I would say that it has made me more aware of my privileges as an individual. And I think that is probably one of the most important steps, which is recognizing your own privileges. That way you can do your best to realize them and realize these privileges that you have that the others don't, and trying to bridge that gap through effective means in the classroom by trying to acknowledge everyone's cultures and their background and accommodate them.
That's almost verbatim what I was just about to say. Just really, it's enhanced my awareness of a lot of things. In particular, like, the whole criminal justice system that's talked about in the new Jim Crow, I found particularly interesting. Just like on a statistical level and going back into all the laws and policies that have been passed that have made it like this.
Um, oh, I believe that like most people in this class are going into education. I, however, am not going into education. So I guess for me, with me wanting to go into politics, it just shows that there's not. I was very privileged, I guess, growing up. So it's not just my type of person. It's not just me because there's other places in the world that need like that are like different, and we need to just like help out everyone because especially in our country right now with the amount of like everything's so like um not equal. And man, I just completely lost my train of thought, but we're gonna carry on.
It's for me, the class course goes, I focus deeply on race, gender, and social class. There are various races and ethnic groups in the world beyond just black, white, and yellow. And gender civil rights movement like LGBTQ, it is very interesting and really surprised to me. I didn't know that there are a lot of struggles and hard tries behind the movement. And I think the social class still could be connected to race. For example, Native Americans get limited opportunities for education or like getting jobs. Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of people get to realize that these are issues that minorities face, and they don't realize all the privileges they have because, and I think this is another like institutional problem, is that this kind of information is gated behind like higher education. Like I doubt any of us really had classes that were like this in middle school. I doubt we had classes like this in high school that talked about these kinds of things. And the fact that it's gated behind pretty expensive schooling that you have to pay for already limits the people that are going to get it to probably the people who they do need it, I'm sure, since it's a lot of white people, rich white kids, or people that probably aren't facing as many struggles as the minorities we're talking about since they're able to get to this level. So I think that sucks that it's gated so highly.
Well, I think part of that is just how many uncomfortable truths that are involved with this class. Like, you know, you're faced with something. You're faced with learning things in this class that you always kind of, at least in my experience, you always kind of knew were there. It just wasn't. It isn't the most pleasant thing to, you know, think about or really dive in deep into, you know, learning about these things, because it's pretty depressing, honestly. Like a lot of it. I know in particular, like when the Native American students came in and did their whole presentation, I thought it was really interesting, but also really heartbreaking. And, you know, as a society, like we just kind of we like to keep those things that are out of sight, out of mind.
Right, and I think that's another thing that the course has helped me with, and it probably helps a lot for people who take this course, is that I don't remember really what it's called, but I believe it's called like racial tolerance. Being able to have discourse about this stuff and not get offended, being able to say, I have prejudices, I have biases that are conscious and unconscious. Maybe I take part in backstage racism or front stage racism, and being able to talk about this stuff with each other is going to be the only way that we can solve it. So I think that's another way that the class has really helped me. Question 5 would be your feelings on the course overall. If you could change anything about the course, what would you change? Let me know what I can do to enhance the effectiveness of the course. Each discussion member, please share your thoughts. For me, I really like the course. It's my second time taking it since the first time. I had some issues come up, so I gave up on the course. But I like the course because it's, I think out of all the courses I've taken at KU, and probably in my life regarding classes, I think it's the most relevant. I think critical thinking is probably one of the best things you'll ever get out of college. And critical thinking about racial issues that have such heavy bearing on society today, I think is really important because you can use this stuff to see problems in your everyday interactions with people. You can use it to see problems in the place you work or the classroom itself and with your friends and your friendships and clubs that you're in. And I think being able to see this stuff is really good. If I could change anything about the course, I'm not sure what I would change. I thought it was really good.
So this is not my necessarily second time taking it, but because of a surgery, I had to drop out last semester. So I didn't really get to see, honestly, much of the class, and I wish I would have been able to see more. But what I did get to see, this is going to be like kind of how you said, it's the most important class I've taken, even though I'm a political science and history major, because all of this stuff is prevalent going forward in my future and in the past. And we just need to be able to, it's like, I feel like more people should take this class, even if they aren't doing education, just because of how it gets you out of your comfort zone and how much you learn about things like we talked about that you haven't learned about in the past in middle school and high school because of people being scared to talk about it. So, oh, and what I'd change, again, I don't really know because I missed a lot of the class last semester and obviously this semester. But as far as I know, it's a great class and I learned a lot. So
I really just kind of appreciated the like the cooperative nature of the class. Like it's very discussion driven, and I mean I know a lot of other classes are too, but this one it's stuff that we all kind of have some idea about, you know, regardless of how critically you're thinking about what you're reading. Or I mean honestly, some of the times if you even did the reading, like everybody has something that they can at least say about it, and it's interesting to go, like when we had our full in-class sessions, it was interesting to just listen to what everybody had to say about whatever particular thing we were talking about. And I appreciated that it was such like an open and just like a thoughtful thinking environment, I guess. I don't really know if I have anything I would change about it. It's kind of hard to say given how crazy things got in the second half, having to move it online. Like I think the online aspect was my least favorite part, and that wasn't any fault of the way that the class is.
It's for me. I had not paid attention to cultural diversity and education before taking this class course. The topic of multicultural education has been around for decades, but really started to take up after civil rights movement in the 1950s and 1960s. And since then, it has been a hot topic of education around the world. The concept is not yet perfect, but is constantly evolving. There are still issues, but with time, things will continue to improve. As a future teacher, I am going to help in the improvement of our current society. Though the class course, I learned how to build critical approach and understand that relates to multicultural education. Many things have improved since my prior education concept. So I would like to apply the elements I learned in future teaching.
The one thing that I would change that I realized was one of the readings. I didn't like Eloquent Rage that much. At times it felt like the reading didn't really go well with what we were learning. I think sometimes it had really good points, but I think sometimes it also felt kind of extreme, and I felt like she was kind of misleading sometimes. I know there are times in the book where she started talking about police brutality, I believe, and she started name dropping a bunch of incidents. And every time I would read up the incidents that she was describing, I was like, holy cow, I gotta see this, because she would say there's video and so on and so on. And then I would look and I'd watch the video and I'd be like, this is not at all how she described this happening. It is very misleading. But in the first course, the first time I took it, there was a book called White Fragility that I thought went amazingly well with the readings that we were talking about, because it did have the same articles and stuff. But I also did like Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. I thought that was probably the best reading that we had. But unless someone else has anything else to add, we will be done.
I just want to say White Fragility was a good book too, because that's what I read and the first time. But no, I have nothing else.
After we stopped the recording, can we talk a little bit about the documentary? I just have a couple questions.
I have a lot of questions as well. So yes.